Okay, everybody. Hi, thanks for joining us on this webinar. We're going to go through a bit of an overview of some of the things that you may or may not have already considered and how or some of the areas that you might want to consider starting now, really, if you haven't done so. The idea of this webinar really isn't to give you a comprehensive step-by-step guide necessarily, but give you the steps that you will want to consider and some direction in terms of the broad areas that you would like to go through in planning your return to work and actually implementing that return to work. I'm joined today by Paris Laidler, who's the facilities manager here at Colby, and Sam Good, who is representing our Colchester. And we're here to just go through some of the thoughts and things that we've considered as our teams, some of the feedback that we've had from businesses that we're working with, and go from there. So Colby is an enterprise support agency based in Colchester. We cover the whole of southeast of England, predominantly Essex. We run two business centres that are home to around 60 businesses in Colchester itself. We provide fully funded business advice, training, other office space through meeting and training room hire. Many of those areas have been quite severely disrupted, it's safe to say, but we've adapted quite well during this time to enable the provision of those services regardless. Obviously some of the services that we've had to do have migrated online, but our office space has certainly been impacted by this, and we've had to do extensive planning, which we're going to hopefully share some highlights from the areas that we've considered as part of our process of planning our return to work, and some of the things you might want to consider as well. So Paris Slade is our facilities manager that's on the call as well. I'm also joined by Sam Good. Sam, do you want to give us a quick overview of our Colchester and what you guys are all about?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So our Colchester is a business improvement district. We're made up of over 490 businesses. So we're business-led and completely business-funded. And we focus our spend on improving the town for consumers, for people who work in the town, and for the residents. And we've got a 5-year term to do so. For COVID-19 in particular, obviously it's been a huge business support base, and we're leading on the recovery for the town centre alongside other stakeholders like the council in how we can bring people safely and confidently back into the town centre. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Okay. Obviously, one of the things that we obviously are considering throughout this webinar today is how to ensure you've got all the information you need. There's a lot of information around which we'll come on to and give you some useful links. Identifying some of the challenges and applying these to your business. There's a lot of broad information, particularly if you've been paying attention to the information that's been made available through the press conferences, etc. But actually making sense of these is quite key. It's not possible for us to go through on a case-by-case basis with examples for every kind of business today, but there's certainly some good information and some useful resources that are available to you. Some of the things you might want to consider when you are making your plans is obviously important, and we'll go through some of those. And also, how do you ensure your team are involved and who you would consider your team at this moment? And finally, how do you make preparations for the return to work that inevitably will come in the hopefully near future? To start off there, I think one of the key bits that is obviously been on everyone's mind is how do you get the information that you need to base your decision making on moving forward. There's huge amounts of information. Some businesses are feeding back to us that there's almost too much information and they're getting a bit lost with it. So making sense of it is really, really vital to understand what bits are applicable to your business, and make sure that you're making the right decisions so that you can return to work safely. Your customers can engage with you safely for longevity of that return, and make sure that you're not in a situation where you are being put at risk, and your customers can still receive the products and services that you would normally get. One of the ways that we've engaged with, obviously, there's huge amounts available on the government websites, on the local councils' websites, and many directories of where to find that information. But but HSE has been providing a newsletter which is quite useful. Paris, I don't know if you've got any other further information beyond sort of the newsletter, or where things that you found are useful resources whilst you've been going through the planning cycle here at Colby.
Yeah, so I mean, I've definitely found the same thing. There's information everywhere, and how you cipher and decipher through that, which is relevant to your business and which part of it is even correct, really, because there is such an overwhelming amount of information. But I think the key here is to sign up to HSE newsletter. HSE will keep you updated on the newsletter before you sign up. Just let them know which industry that you are in, and they will give you industry specific information. So, for example, recently we completed our Corona secure document, or our risk assessment. We were provided that guidance via the HSE newsletter, and we were provided guidance specific to our industry. So we were in an office environment. I was given the document that was specific to an office environment, which meant that I could then build up our risk assessment based on that document that we had.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think that's the key, is the information you've got to bear in mind. You know, there's obviously different industries, different sectors, and picking out the information that's most relevant to you, and applying that. Sam, with obviously the nature of the businesses you engage with tend to be more high street, retail focused, perhaps. Is there different considerations or different areas where they might look to seek resources to stay up to date with different bits relevant to them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with a different sector specific. Obviously, different sectors are going to face different challenges with social distancing and other things. Everything that we refer to is definitely, as Paris mentioned, is industry specific. So, going to your industry specific body, and trying to get as much guidelines as possible, really, and referring to your local authority. Is definitely useful, because different locations have their different benefits and guidance as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty. Yeah, particularly the local councils are obviously very familiar with what needs to be done across the board. So certainly in Colchester Borough Council's guidance has been pretty comprehensive. So we'll go into it in more detail, but Colby offer a business advice service, and a lot of the clients that we're engaging with on a business advice perspective often know that there is information out there, or they might even have access to that information, but they just need to make sense of it and know what are the most important elements of that. So we are here as Colby, and you can visit us at colby.co.uk if you wanted to book a fully funded business advice appointment in, and one of our qualified advisors can go through some of that and actually make sense of the information that you might already have in more detail. So we can go into more detail of that in due course. But okay, so obviously once you know where to get the information, you're going to have to actually do the research and make that application to your business itself. So Paris, again, you would have gone through a risk assessment here for us at Colby, and I know that's been a relatively comprehensive process. Some of the information that guides that has been obviously released last week, and obviously businesses will be going through and doing that risk assessment at the moment. Have you got any sort of thoughts on how they can go about doing that, or and also actually where to find it in the first place if they haven't done that already?
Yeah, so on the .gov website there is a Corona Secure or Coronavirus Secure link. Definitely using credible sources, so hse.gov, IOSH, your professional body, your industry body, keeping an eye on those sources. But specifically for the risk assessment, I would go to .gov, and there's a coronavirus risk assessment guide there for you. If you're not familiar with completing a risk assessment, on the HSE website there's also a guide to completing a risk assessment. So if that's something you're not familiar with, there's help there for you. I think it's also important to work with your operations teams and teams that might have be responsible for business continuity. So working together to make sure your business continuity and your risk assessments complement each other, that they're not in any way not working together or contradict each other in any way.
Absolutely. So I think there's a few key points there. Is obviously understanding what you need to do from a government perspective based on the guidelines. So obviously there is a risk assessment form which is linked on the screen at the moment, which gives you quite a lot of information via that link as to what you need to do. HSE have obviously provided links on how to complete a risk assessment, as Paris says. And the other bit you need to think about as part of your research process is think about actually what your products, services are and how they have been delivered in the past, and how they could be delivered moving forward. So there's different ways that you could deliver, a service. Previously, with our business advice, that used to be traditionally all face to face. People came into our offices and had a meeting there, about their business that they were looking to start, for instance, and would have that conversation with one of our advisors in our offices. And obviously, that's not possible at the moment. So we've had to look at that and research ways in which we could deliver that, which is now being done online through video conferencing. So there's different options out there, and researching some of the solutions alongside some of the risks that you want to assess is really, really key. We've also mentioned on this slide as well around other factors you want to consider. So things like well-being and mental health around not just yourself, but as business owners, because many people listening to this will be the managing director, the person that stocks the shelves. They'll be the person that runs the front office, and the finance person, all in one body. But it's how do you actually maintain that well-being, at a very challenging time for yourself and for your customers who might react differently and engage with your services before. So there's lots of different areas around that you can look at as part of your risk assessment, and considering things like mental health or like accessibility to your offices, or your premises as it might see fit, will be really, really key. So I think don't think just beyond washing your hands. There's a lot of different areas that you want to consider as part of your risk assessment. I think, Sam, you'll probably have quite different challenges from your client base, where obviously most people are retailers or based on the high streets or within that business improvement district area. Obviously a lot of the businesses we have as tenants at Colby are office-based businesses a lot of the time, or providing service out of an office. How do you see it being different in terms of doing the research or planning process for businesses that are on the high street or in the town centre?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two sort of ways that I look at this. Is you have your risk assessments that are highlighting your working environment, and obviously with the office sector and professional services sector at the moment, the risk assessments will definitely highlight opportunities for big working environment changes. So increased working from home possibly, or rotational rotas. As far as the other sectors go, like retail and hospitality, your risk assessment is largely based around your customer experience and how they're operating through your business as well, which we're picking up with a lot of our independent businesses at the moment in particular. But I think that as Paris mentioned, the beauty of risk assessments is even if you think your business like the back of your hand from previous to COVID-19 is going to bring up a lot of barriers which may need you to slightly adapt your business model, and risk assessments are there to raise these sort of barriers and hurdles that you can defeat and get through, instead of an issue raising whilst you're operational after COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. So I think that in particular to retail and hospitality itself, each independent business faces its own unique challenges dependent on the premises that it's in, the location and the town centre it's in. So I'd always recommend that especially our bid members to contact us, and we will be more than happy to go through any risk assessments or documents like this and try and help direct that.
Excellent. We'll provide some contact details for the R Colchester as well towards the end of the this webinar, which would be great. So yeah, and obviously Colby's on hand in terms of supporting any businesses as well that need that guidance or just a second set of eyes potentially on their risk assessments. So it's certainly a risk assessment, but it's also almost an operational assessment of their products and services, and the provision of those. So. Excellent. So when you've done your risk assessment, obviously one of the next bits is actually how do you create a plan. So Paris kindly put together quite a comprehensive risk assessment for us here at Colby. And we've mapped out quite a few of the areas of our businesses that will be affected. Colby delivers obviously the business advice that many people will be familiar with, but we also do business training. We have the tenants in the building who obviously use that as their main premises, their main offices as well. So we need to consider that. We have virtual tenants that register almost a postal address and screened address with us that we need to consider. And there's a variety of other initiatives, networking events, and other things that we get involved with, which without a doubt, almost every area of our business has been affected. So to start with, we mapped out exactly all of these different areas of our business. And we looked at how each particular area of business, what we would do in a normal circumstance. How was that service area run previously? And that was a really good starting point, because then from there we could say, well, we can't do that anymore because, or certainly not at the moment, because that is being affected in this way as accordance to the risk assessment. And because we had done the research as to what HSE's guidelines were and what their suggestions were, what the government was telling us, we could then make suggestions as to how we could do that differently. So what we did is, in a particular area of our business services, we could identify, for instance, business training. We could set up stages that we would go through. We did it in different ways, which we had a three stage process, which is similar to what the government have now announced in terms of their 5 levels of severity. And so that's been quite useful in the sense that we have our top level of severity, which is really where we are in lockdown. And that means some of the restrictions on our services, or the delivery of our services, are needing to be done remotely almost entirely. And then as we progress and we start, and the government starts releasing or lifting some of the restrictions, we can slowly but surely start changing or reintroducing different areas of delivery. So an example of this might be with our tenancy services. So whilst we've been in a lockdown process, we have still been going to the site to carry out essential maintenance, fire alarm tests, that sort of thing, and some postal services. But that's been on a much more limited schedule. But as we now have seen that there has been a transition from that stage 4, as the government had outlined in their press conferences, and as we work towards stage 3, we're now coordinating the level of our planning to match that. So we'll be moving to what we've termed our moderate stage, and some of the restrictions there allow us to be in the office a lot more often, and go from there. When the government starts getting down to a lower stage in terms of their rating system that they have, we will make our plan reflect that as well, and again lift more restrictions with our business centres to help us start easing back. But I think the key to any of this is doing it in a controlled way, and having clear milestones as to what that might be. So for your businesses, that might mean, okay, when the schools go back, we're going to do this, or when the R rating gets below a certain point, we're going to do this. Or you might be similar to us and say, actually, we'll be guided by the government's scale of 1 to 5 as to when we bring in certain measures at certain times. The benefit of that is, if touch wood, it doesn't happen, but if unfortunately the situation gets worse again, is you have a way to fall back and to flex up and down on your response, which is quite key. But certainly understanding what areas your business are going to be, what they are like in normal circumstances, is a good place to start. Figure out what you can and can't do due to the restrictions that are in place, and then you can do a staged approach. So perhaps a tiered approach where you have a high level severity at the moment, but as things get better and better, you can slowly lift different elements or reintroduce different elements of those services to allow more contact in accordance with social distancing. the next bit, which is absolutely critical, is the communication with both your staff and your customers. Because without that, any plan is no good. If it's stuck in your head, that's not going to help. Particularly if you are a sole trader and it's just you, or you've got a small team. Even with a smaller team, it's almost more important because you so much more reliant on them to deliver that plan, that you need to engage with them clearly in a timely manner. So I would certainly advise communicating that if you haven't got a plan in place already, to communicate that you are making one, when you expect to have some ideas around when that will be released, and put placeholders out there, either by email or have calls with your clients if possible, and certainly with your staff who will need to implement that. And I use the term staff quite loosely because staff with smaller businesses, you might not have a lot of staff, but you probably will have suppliers or key stakeholders or contacts that are really, really important in delivering your business. So certainly keep them informed as to what your plans are, so that they can stay in touch with you and you can stay in touch with them and work together as you come out of this process. So I don't know if there's any areas, Paris, if there's any other bits which I know, obviously keeping it quite high level there, but is there any areas that I've sort of not covered in terms of our plan there, without going into the details of our full plan?
No, I think it's quite important to point out that if your business is less than 5 people, there's no requirement for you to have this in writing. But I do think it's very important for you to have a plan in place. I think it's really helpful. And going back to your point about speaking to, using the customer line loosely, for us, we've got tenants, so we would want our tenants to work in the same way that we work. So it's really, really important to communicate with everybody that would come into your environment. From the basics of social distancing to the even more important things when you think of, it has there been an occurrence of coronavirus and how do we deal with that? So I think it's really important, really, really important. Communication is key.
Yeah, I think that reporting process is very important, and almost having an understanding of, if there was to be a situation where, again, touch wood, the worst shouldn't happen, but if it did, what would you be doing about it, and how would you handle that situation? That is, whilst we never wish that on anyone to happen, I think it is certainly worthwhile exercise to go through what if scenarios. So I think that's certainly part of the planning process, and almost having a understanding if that was to happen. Sam, in terms of some of the stuff that you're experiencing, is there any other further thoughts you want to add there?
Yeah, I think you've covered most of the points there, and essentially the slides that you've covered before, around the risk assessment, all of these things create confidence not only in your customers but your staff as well. And one thing that I think a lot of businesses need to make sure they're doing is demonstrating to their staff that when they return to work, they're returning to a safe environment, that all the right protocols are in place. And when we reference some of our businesses like retail and hospitality, when you return, it doesn't have to be a return of your business as it was before COVID-19. It can be a slightly staged timeline, like you mentioned, Craig. We see a lot of retail businesses who are reopening with a closed door, with appointments only for retail destinations. So yeah, there's different ways of looking at it, but I think the confidence side is a huge thing, not only for customers but the staff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key, isn't it? Is your clients, customers, staff will be flexible if they know what is going on, and at least that it's been considered as to what you're doing with your business and how you're treating it. So that certainly buys quite a lot of goodwill into if people feel that you've actually considered it, you're making plans and you're making preparations. Might not be exactly what they wanted, or in an ideal world, I'm sure everybody would be like to be back at work 5 days a week, and engaging with shops and retailers and offices as they normally would. But I think as long as that people can see progress and see that there's a plan of action in place, then that's fine. One thing that's important to point out is that you don't have to necessarily have all of the answers. but you should certainly have considered all of the risks previously, and at least made some consideration or some provision for that in your plan. So they build flexibility into your plan, because ultimately you'll intend to do a lot of things. You are still running your business. You've still got various things to consider, as business as usual activities to some degree. So obviously adding in additional measures can take up a lot of time and effort. So if whilst they're very, very important, I think it's key to make sure that you are flexible with that plan, because again, guidelines may be increased or changed or adapted as more and more information comes out. So any plan that you do have should be able to build in some level of flexibility with that, so that you can adapt and make sure that everything's as safe as possible. So key things to obviously as specific as you can to business, but not so specific that you don't have that flexibility. If you make a commitment that you're going to be open between a certain time, well, that's great. But if then restrictions are added, then and you're not able to stay within that time, then unless you've caveated that you're able to change, then you're going to have to pick up that again through your communications. And I think that communication piece is key through that, because again, if changes do need to be made, you can make them. Okay, so moving on, I think the bit we've touched upon there, which is quite important, is around the involving your team. We at Colby again have had quite a lot of involvement with the team, and the management team have been laying out an initial plan through going through some of the steps that we've already outlined. And once we had that initial guideline, we invited our team members to share with us any concerns that they might have, any thoughts or suggestions they might have that we could incorporate into the plan, and any apprehensions, around other non-work elements, because I think that is one thing that is quite easy to miss off when we talk about business or your office or facilities or whatever it might be, is actually thinking about your staff, your team, your customers, your suppliers will all have lives outside of work. And I think the important bit of this is that your plan also needs to reflect that. We have team members with children who, a lot of the schools haven't gone back and are looking unlikely in some instances to go back for quite a few months. So in that situation, there's childcare commitments. So to expect a team to suddenly drop everything from their childcare commitments and come into the office is obviously not necessarily going to be possible. So setting out clear expectations to what we would like, but then making sure that we're having a two-way conversation as to being flexible there. It's not always going to be possible, and I advise anybody where they have team members and have business demands that they need to manage against personal demands, to try and involve some sort of HR expertise if they can, and if they can't come to some sort of reasonable solution. But certainly through having that conversation, you're halfway there. And I think that's really key. One bit that we invited once we presented the plan, we laid that all out. We had a team meeting and discussed that in an open format so people could share collectively what their feedback was. But throughout that, both before that meeting and afterwards, and that's an ongoing offer to our team, is that if they have any concerns or have anything that they don't want to discuss in a group context, to make sure that they've got opportunity to do so in a one-to-one format as well. Because if they haven't got that one-to-one option, not everybody wants to discuss something personal in a group format. So make sure that if you have line management responsibilities, or if you've got a small team that might not want to discuss it in a group session, that they have the opportunity to speak to somebody more directly about that. Flexibility is something that is being protected by various rulings and regulations that are being put out, and I think again it's only ethical in a certain sense to offer that where you can with your planning. Paris, have you got anything else to add in terms of that? Obviously, as one of the Colby team, I suppose you've had direct experience with our approach.
Yeah, I mean, really listening to their anxieties was something that we were really I thought we really did keep that key, and we did keep that keen. We wanted the guys to know that, you know, we know you're anxious to come back to work. I know you're anxious about COVID and the implications of what could happen, but really discussing that with them and understanding their anxieties. And we made a point of providing them with resources to be able to seek advice and guidance around their anxieties also. And I think that really did help. It really did help with their confidence levels, because having the guidance in place, they always now know what the next step will be. That they're in the know at all times. And if they do feel anxious, they've got somewhere to go to try and vent that anxiety to as well. So I think that's been key for us.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously displayed on screen at the moment. There's a link to HSE's guide to talking with with your workforce. Again, that's useful reading for anybody that works with any stakeholders, and some of the thinking there can be useful with working with clients or anybody else really, as to what the expectations are. But it certainly reiterates that point around communication. And I think there's lots, as it seems that every advert on the television and everybody is using at the moment, as we are right now. There's lots of online platforms that can be used to facilitate conversations. Phones are fine, conference calls are fine, but ideally, particularly if you haven't seen your team members face to face, then I do encourage use of things like video conferencing. There's plenty of options out there, and many of them have free trials or free options, free packages that you can use, which have some restrictions, but will get the job done. Even things like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or FaceTime can be used. So there's lots of different options out there that don't cost a lot or are even free to speak to. Sam, I suppose you've got a team over there at the bid. Is there anything specific that you guys have been doing?
No, I think you've managed it really well there. Actually, one thing we're doing is we'll be putting a questionnaire. I suppose questionnaire seems quite formal, but each of our staff will be asked about their family commitments and how they're managing that. Their transport, a lot of our staff use public transport, which is obviously being advised against at the moment. So we've always maintained flexible working as much as possible, because we have a lot of focus on our staff well-being mentally and physically. So yeah, I think you've managed most of it. And just communication, communication as much as possible, whether that's informal or formal, through whatever technique possible. And I think that is a massive thing here, which needs to be assured, and making sure your staff, when they return to work, they're confident in A, what they're coming back to and what their job role consists of, and B, how safe they're going to be. So yeah, I think you covered most of it there. I'd agree.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that ongoing communication is really important. So yeah, absolutely. So the final bit really is about being prepared. So you've got your plan, you've done your research, you've spoken with your team, your stakeholders, your customers. You're getting the message out there. But actually, that's only going to be as good as what you actually carry out. So preparation, obviously there's going to be elements that you'll need to get ready for your return to work. The key to this is doing it now. Don't leave it. If you guys watching this haven't started preparing and starting planning and doing the research, now's the time to start doing that. You will undoubtedly need to get supplies. You'll want to get, that might just be general stock that you might not have ordered already, or it might be PPE, or it might be some sort of antibacterial wipes or whatever else that you might need. Delays are going to be likely. Again, I wouldn't advise overstocking. There's no need to return to any sort of panic buying, which obviously is at the start of the lockdown period. But certainly being ready and conscious of what you will need, when you will need it, and make sure you get any reasonable orders placed in good time is really, really key. Paris, do you want to just take us through some of the stuff we might be doing as part of Colby, in our return to work?
Yeah, so as we were doing this guide, as we were completing our business continuity and doing our risk assessments, I did put the feelers out with our suppliers to find out how long the lead times were going to be. So when Craig was writing the business continuity plan, I was very clear with Craig. I could say these are the lead times for the things that we needed to procure. So I think that's really key, keeping really good relationships with your suppliers to be able to find out what lead times and things like that are going to be. And also just thinking ahead, what do I need? If I need hand sanitizer and antibacterial this, and if I need perspex screens, where am I going to get those from, and how is that going to work for me in terms of how am I going to get them fitted, how long is it going to take for them to become in stock. So I think really, really working with your suppliers and just finding out lead times is going to be really key for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, is there obviously some of the nature of the preparations that your clients will be dealing with that might be slightly different to an office-based environment? Is there other preparations or other bits that you might think that would be useful for them to think about?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, we're leading on the town centre recovery, with other stakeholders, and I look at the town centre as similar to Colby, but on a bigger scale. We our public realm is our space still. So we've launched resource portal and basically discounted prices for all our businesses with products that we've checked the spec and we know exactly the quality they can get. And hopefully our businesses can order through that. Reiterating the points you've mentioned, and just and making sure you're as ready as possible. And we always encourage our businesses to seek the advice if they're unsure. So obviously, if they're bid members, then to come and chat with us or chat with yourselves at Colby, and try and get as much guidance on that where possible. Again, going back to supply, we have a real challenge with supplies, especially our retail sector and dead stock at the moment, and the logistics of all of that as well. So making sure you're as ready as possible, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I think that leads us nicely on. I mean, obviously, we've only touched on kept a quite high level today, going through some of the areas. But obviously, in going through that planning process, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to take on. And I think that's really the challenge that most businesses will face is how do they do their normal business routine whilst also being COVID ready. And I think that is a very, very big challenge for a lot of organisations, no matter what kind of organisation you are. So both our Colchester and Colby are ready and available in terms of support. Colby provide a fully funded business advice service. It's all done remotely at the moment. So if you contact us with any of the details that are shown on screen at the moment, we will book you in with one of our qualified advisors, and they can go through anything from business planning to emergency finance options to cash flow forecasting, training, resources, even just help to demystify some of the challenges that people will face in going through this planning cycle, or just general business challenges that they might need support with, that they might be already facing or have already faced in normal circumstances. So that's we've done that for 37 odd years. So we are ready and available for people if they need that. Just give us a call. It's fully funded, as I say. So, and Sam, obviously you've got some resources available as well.
Yep. So of course, all of our members, maintain free guidance and support through us, no matter what it is, and they can refer to us through email or our email of our website for any guidance. And even if it's not relevant to specifically the bid, we work closely with the council, both county and borough, and other support guidelines as well. So we can definitely direct in the right and correct way as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, brilliant. Well, I think that's pretty much everything. Hopefully it gives you a bit of a high level overview of some of the broad areas to consider going through. Obviously, if you want to discuss anything in more detail, relevant or specific to your business, then obviously our Colchester and Colby are here and available. Please get in touch. Otherwise, we'll hopefully be speaking with you all soon. Thanks a lot.